Assalamu alaikum, everybody. We're here with Scott Ritter, American vet, nuclear weapons inspector, anti-war activist, political pundit, war strategist, felon. Technically, the American government is after him. But to hear, for us in the global south, as they call it in the Muslim world, he is truly a treasure to learn from, to learn that there is not only the binary option of fighting against the West or to reply to Western aggression with aggression, but to learn of a third option where we can all learn to coexist and live in peace. And I've been learning from him since I was a teenager. I'm now 30, although I look much older. He needs no introduction. Scott Ritter, the man himself. Sir, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to speak with you.
Thank you very much, sir. We're not going to take up too much of your time. We're going to go through these things quickly, but just as a small introduction for the audience, what was your role post the Gulf War once you had served in the American military and you go into your role as a UN's weapon inspector, where technically you work for a third party, but you are contracted by the UN to dismantle the Iraqi chemical weapon and potential nuclear program. Can you walk us through the steps of what that looks like, how that changed your worldviews and where you're coming from and how it informs the work that you're doing today, sir?
Certainly. Let's just start off the fact that I was raised as what I call a child of the Cold War. My father was a career military officer himself. And this was during the 1960s and 1970s and early 1980s at the height of the Cold War. My father did tours in Vietnam. My father was deployed around the world to Korea, to Turkey, to various hotspots, responding to the geopolitical conflict that was taking place, ideological conflict between the United States, the force of democracy, and the Soviet Union, the empire of evil. And I truly believe this. I grew up literally believing that we were in an existential struggle against global communism, against the evil of communism. And I accepted at face value the inherent good of American-based democracy. This was ingrained in me. And so when I graduated from high school, I went to high school in Hawaii, Turkey, and Germany, Department of Defense schools. And when I graduated from high school in Germany, my life's mission was to make myself available to my government to defeat communism. And I chose to go into the military to be prepared to fight the communist threat. I ended up going to college. I majored in Russian history. Why? I have to know my enemy. My duty is to know my enemy better than I know myself so that I can better prepare to defeat them. And I studied Russian language, Russian history, Russian culture in an effort to learn about who it is that I'm prepared to fight. I developed a deep respect for Russia. I developed a deep respect for the Soviet Union. They were still my enemy, but as you learn about your enemy, you realize that these are cultured people. They're not people to be trifled with. This is an important thing to learn about your enemy, not to underestimate them. But they were still my enemy. I joined the Marine Corps. I became an intelligence officer because of my Russian history background. And I spent the first years of my Marine Corps career training to fight the Soviet threat in 29 Palms, California, part of first the Rapid Deployment Force of the Marine Corps and then in an artillery battalion, nuclear capable. We trained to use nuclear weapons against the Soviets in times of war. And I was singularly focused on this. When I say that I woke up every morning wanting to learn how to better destroy my Soviet enemy, it's not an exaggeration. My life was all about learning how to kill the enemy, to win, to close with and destroy through firepower and maneuver. And I took the job very seriously, and so too did the Marine Corps. There's a reason why Marines believe they're the best. It's because we are the best, and we are the best because we are solely focused on killing our enemy. That is our sole purpose for existing. Later on, I would develop a nuance saying that that's okay so long as the government respects us insofar that they won't send us to fight a war needlessly. You have this tool, this very dangerous tool. but you should exhaust all options short of war before sending this tool to war. Because once you send this tool to war, understand we're going to do one thing: kill. We're not there to make peace, to make love, to make life easier, better. We're there to kill the enemy. And that was my life. And then in 1987, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev signed the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This was a treaty to get rid of a certain category of nuclear weapons that were threatening global stability. Russian specialists to a new organization, the On-Site Inspection Agency, that would implement this treaty, go over into the Soviet Union and help get rid of these weapons. And I was a very junior officer at the time, a first lieutenant, and I was picked to be one of the first inspectors to go over to the Soviet Union to implement this treaty. It was a very high honor. The people that I was working with were genuine experts in their field: colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors who had been in the military a long time, Vietnam War veterans, Cold War veterans. And I was this inexperienced lieutenant. And they gave me great responsibility. I helped install a $12 to $20 million, depending on whose budget you talk about, monitoring facility outside of a Soviet missile factory. Understand what I'm saying? We built a monitoring facility outside of a Soviet missile factory that had produced missiles that were now being eliminated, but continued to produce missiles that were related to the Soviet strategic deterrent. We had to come up with a means to inspect these missiles in a way that respected Soviet sovereign concerns, meaning we're not there to spy on them, but to also make sure that from a verification standpoint, these missiles aren't the prohibited missiles in hiding. This required a lot of cooperation between us and the Soviets. And this was an eye-opening experience because remember, I am trained to kill them. And when you speak of killing people, even though I developed appreciation for culture, history, language, you dehumanize them. You say these are people that deserve to die. And therefore, I am justified in my efforts to try and kill them. And now I have to work with them in their country, in their city, amongst their families, amongst their friends, amongst their colleagues. And you see normal Soviet life, Russian life, and you say, my God, these are human beings. These are fellow human beings who want the same thing that I want. They view me as a threat the way I view them as a threat, but I'm not a threat to them. I only do what I do because of them, because of their inherent evil. But then you find out they're not inherently evil, that they're actually good people. And you work with them to achieve this wonderful objective to get rid of nuclear weapons, to make the world a better place to live so that they can raise their families, so that I can get married and raise my family. And it was a life-altering experience, a life-altering experience. And I did it for 2.5 years. And like I said, it changed my entire focus on the world. I learned so much from this experience.
And you became a Russian sleeper cell agent since then.
Yes, what I'm really trying to say is that the Russians turned me, and I became a long-term sleeper agent for Russia.
Yeah, Stalin and the like, right? Okay, fair.
Right. Well, I mean, some people will say that, but the evidence clearly points in the other direction.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
While I was there, I received 2 classified commendations from the director of the CIA, and again, I say this as a first lieutenant and a very junior captain for my work. In the FBI, ironically, I also ran counterintelligence programs for a while, and I was brought into the FBI Academy where I would give lectures and host seminars about what's happening. So the notion that I was a sleeper agent is refuted by the evidence. I was actually, if you want to think about it, a threat to the Soviet Union because of my abilities as an intelligence and counterintelligence officer. Fortunately, for me and for the Soviets, my leadership in the On-Site Inspection Agency made it clear that I wasn't there to spy, that I wasn't there to gather intelligence. I was there to implement a treaty, and that was my number one responsibility. And this was an important lesson because there was plenty of opportunity to make mischief as an intelligence officer. But we were so committed to carrying out this important task of disarmament that I was told this is the president's treaty. The president has given an order to implement this treaty free of the taint of espionage, free of the taint of Cold War mistrust. We are to trust but verify. We trust the Russians, but we verify to make sure that everything that's done is done properly. And this is another one of those important lessons about integrity. The integrity of a person, the integrity of a mission, the integrity of a nation. When you say you're going to do something, when you sign a treaty and you put the President of the United States' reputation, the reputation of a nation behind this, you have a duty and responsibility not to betray the trust they put into you in giving you this job. I was in Russia to do one thing and one thing only, and that was to implement the treaty that was signed. And this was a big task. There were many people trying to undermine this treaty, trying to make this treaty not work because they didn't want to have better relations with the Soviet Union. Myself and a handful of other people fought through all of this, all of these efforts to trip us up. And we stayed true to our task, stayed true to our mission. We stayed true to the treaty and true to our country and true to world peace. And we achieved the unachievable. We succeeded where many people didn't want us to succeed. And so when I left the on-site inspection agency, I had learned some very important lessons. Now, things are going to get complicated because I was supposed to go to school, get proper Marine Corps education, and then go on to do specialized tasks related to what I had done in Russia. But Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, and I was pulled out of the school and sent instead to develop war plans, how we can defeat the Iraqi enemy. It was interesting because, again, I was a captain. I had a good reputation at this time because of what I had done in the Soviet Union, which is why they pulled me out. A Major General, Matt Caulfield, was the head of what was known as the Marine Corps Warfighting Center. And he was tasked by the Commandant of the Marine Corps, General Al Gray, to create a planning cell on how best to use the Marine Corps' combat capabilities against Iraq. And he was interviewing me for the job. And he said, tell me what you think about Iraq, what's going on. And I said, well, sir, to be dead honest, we're fighting the wrong Arabs. He said, what do you mean? And I said, well, the reason why Iraq is doing what they're doing is because the Kuwaitis were slant drilling, stealing their oil, trying to suppress the oil market to collapse the Iraqi economy. I said, Iraq really had no choice to do what it does. And he says, do you believe this? I said, absolutely. He said, so how does that influence how you're going to perform your duties? Well, I said, it doesn't. I'm a Marine. You give me an order, a lawful order, I'll obey that order. If you tell me my job is to plan combat operations against the Iraqis, that's my job. But you asked me a different question. What do I feel about this? And I feel strongly that the good Arabs are the Iraqis and the bad Arabs are the Saudis and the Kuwaitis. But if my job, and he went, well, you're honest, you got the job. And I helped plan combat operations. And then because of the job I did, I got sent to General Norman Schwarzkopf's staff during the Gulf War because I was a missile guy. When the Scud missiles started flying against Israel and Saudi Arabia, I was pulled out of my analytical task and given more of an operational task of figuring out how to hunt down these Scud missiles and destroy them before they got fired. I worked very closely with Special Operations Forces, British, American, Air Forces, to try and come up with strategies to prevent this. The war ended. We were never successful. I mean, we defeated Iraq in this war, on the ground war. But what I tell people is Iraq won the missile war. We didn't destroy a single Iraqi launcher. And you had people like me who are professionals trying to do that. So I can't sit here and say that we were incompetent, we didn't try. I know what we were trying to do. We put Delta Force on the ground, the best soldiers we have in the U.S. Army on the ground in Western Iraq to hunt down Iraqi Scud, and we couldn't do it. We put our best pilots and our best airplanes over the skies of Western Iraq, and we couldn't destroy a single missile. Hats off to the Iraqi missile force. Consummate professionals, and they won that aspect of the war. So I learned a lot from that too, about arrogance, about hubris, about thinking I'm American, we can accomplish anything we want. The Iraqis taught me a lesson in humility because they beat us. They continued to fire missiles against Israel up until the last day of the war, despite everything we were trying to do to prevent them from doing that. And I left the war. I had what they call a good war. And what that means is, A, I didn't die. That's always a good thing. And B, I did a good job. It's a controversial job. I was fired by General Schwarzkopf twice, and I was arrested by General Schwarzkopf once. because I was very aggressive in trying to hunt down these Scud missiles. I was accused of trying to start my own war, which is why they arrested me. They then released me, and then they gave me a medal, and they sent me home. But when the war ended, I had to make a decision. Do I stay in the Marine Corps, or do I go on with my life? And I had joined the Marine Corps to kill Soviets, to kill Russians. And the Cold War was over. We weren't in the business of killing Soviets anymore. I had served my country in a war, but it was a confusing war because, as I said, I didn't view the Iraqis as the enemy. I realized that the geopolitical picture was very complicated, and I decided I didn't want to do that again. I had done my duty to my country. I had served my country in combat, but now it was time to move on. So I left the Marine Corps, and I was going to go on and do, actually I was hired by H.J. Heinz, an American corporation, and I was going to go to the former Soviet Union and help install food processing plants, to be a businessman. But then the coup in Russia came in August of 1991, and that was the end of that initiative. H.J. Heinz pulled out. I was unemployed. And I got a phone call from my former boss in Russia, an Army colonel named Doug England, who was now the chief of staff of the United Nations, implementing the disarmament of Iraq. And he said, we got a problem. He called me in. I had a meeting with him. He said, the Iraqis are lying. They aren't declaring everything they're supposed to declare, and they're interfering with the inspectors. And so we have to change the way we were doing inspections. He originally, because he was the guy who, like me, helped implement the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, which was a gentleman's agreement based upon a treaty that was mutually respected by both parties. And so the first inspections that went to Iraq were designed based upon the INF model. He said, we now need to change this. He remembered that I was a very aggressive intelligence officer when I was in the Soviet Union. I had to be held back. And he said, we need some of that aggression now. We need you to come in and create an intelligence unit that finds where the Iraqis are hiding these weapons so we can send inspection teams in to locate them. Suddenly I had a job, and I was back at the United Nations as a UN employee. I remember, though, I went to the State Department as soon as I got back, as soon as I got in, and I went to them. I said, what game are we playing here? I always need to know the rules. I said, what game are we playing here? I'm here to find weapons of mass destruction, but I have listened to your statements, and you're no friend of Saddam Hussein. Is there a wink, wink, nod, nod relationship here? Are we saying we're doing one thing but doing another? I need to know. I'm not saying that I won't play the wink, wink, nod, nod game. Come on, man, I'm not an angel. I'm an intelligence officer, but I'm a man of integrity. I have to know what the rules are when I start. And they told me right then, they said, your job, and this is so important, your job is to work for the United Nations Special Commission to implement fully the Resolution 687 calling for Iraq to disarm. I said, who do I work for? They said, you work for the executive chairman. I said, but he's a United Nations official. They said, yes. You take your orders from the executive chairman. And I looked him in the eyes. I said, are you certain? They said, absolutely. And I said, there you go. I know my contract. I know my job. And I went forth and I did that job. And later on, when the CIA started coming in saying, well, we're really trying to overthrow Saddam, we want to do this, and I said, no, I work for the executive chairman. My job is to implement Security Council resolutions. I carried out intelligence operations, all the things that I wanted to do in the Soviet Union, but I wasn't allowed to do because we were adhering to the treaty. I got to do in Iraq. Why? Not because we were being sneaky, because they were hiding. They were lying. They submitted false declarations. Initially, one of the first assessments I wrote talked about missiles. And I said, I think they're hiding 100 missiles from us in about a dozen launchers, or half a dozen launchers. And everybody went, how do you know that? And I showed them my numbers. I showed them my thinking. I'm a pretty good analyst. Later on, when we confronted the Iraqis in March of 1992, they admitted. They said, yes, we lied. We submitted a false declaration. You know how many missiles they admitted hiding from us? 98. I was off by 2. I guess I'm not the greatest analyst in the world. I said 100, it was 98.
That's pretty good.
But the Iraqis admitted 98 and a half a dozen launchers. Everything I said that they were hiding, they were hiding. And then, we said, well, where are they? They said, well, we blew them all up in the summer of 1991 and we buried them underground. So now I had to lead a team in because I'm a very aggressive kind of guy. Leadership of war is a vacuum. And not just running the intelligence, but I began to run the inspections themselves. So I gathered the intelligence, run the inspection, and I controlled the entire information cycle, a unique thing in operational world. Normally intelligence and operations, it's separate. Here we created a fusion cell where it was one. The guy that was collecting the intelligence, assessing the intelligence, was now leading the inspections and then doing the feedback loop. So I was uniquely empowered.
That was fueled a bit by a paranoia where you said you were doing one thing for the UN, but then you started to realize that no, this is some sort of CIA coup as well. Was that paranoia fueling you to be like, I need to be hands-on with the operations as well as the intelligence?
Correct. I needed to be in control of everything because that's the only way I could guarantee the integrity of the mission.
Right.
Because if you turned it over to operations, you'd get another person in there that you didn't know. You didn't know what orders they received. You didn't know how they, because we had examples of that. We had examples of outsiders taking inspections and going in and doing things that in my inspections were the most sensitive inspections. We were the most aggressive inspections. We were taking on Saddam Hussein's security establishment head on because we had identified them as being the ones, the Mukhabarat, the intelligence service, Amin al-Am, Amin al-Khas, the special guard. Saddam's personal security had been responsible for hiding these weapons and moving them around. And now the Iraqis said, okay, well, we got rid of them. Well, so I went in, I became a forensic investigator. We had to dig all the missile parts up and lay them out like bones. And then look at the serial numbers, collect all the serial numbers. We had to go to the Russians and get the
Ballistic
production
archeology,
records.
right?
Absolutely. So in the end, we were able to get 96 of 98 missiles confirmed. We said we can account for these. There's two we don't know what happened to them. We don't know. They were blown up. We got little pieces here, little pieces there. But if you want me to tell you 100% that I know what happened to those two missiles, I can't. I strongly believe they were blown up. And somewhere out there, there's bones in the ground that we didn't find. But I'm not worried about those two missiles because we've accounted for the vast majority of them. I tried to close the door on this. I ran very, very aggressive inspections that took us right up to the brink of war, pushing the Iraqis right up to the brink of war to investigate every missile destruction event. Delta Force claimed to have destroyed missiles. If Delta Force was telling the truth, then that means that the Iraqis were lying because those missiles are in addition to what we've discovered. And so that would mean Iraq has a different source of missiles that they haven't told us. So now we had to investigate Delta Force and the Special Air Services combat operations. Medals had been given out to these people. They were called heroes for destroying Scuds. And I did an investigation with their cooperation that proved they didn't destroy a single Scud missile.
And these Scuds,
do you understand how unpopular that made me?
The claim of these Scuds was during Desert Storm or during the Operation Enduring Freedom and the invasion of Iraq?
No, this is during Desert Storm.
Right. So in Desert Storm, there were people outside of the area you were operating in, and the claims that they had made were that they had already destroyed Scud launchers. And then they
never destroyed a single.
And then you had to go back, do this forensic audit, do this sort of, ballistic archaeology, or reinvent the wheel with this thing. So you've been pushing people's buttons from the 80s, from the late 80s, right? That's basically it. And you've developed a reputation as this go-getting sort of character, and you don't necessarily don't get along with the project. You do obey orders. You're a good soldier. But at this point, you have shown that you are dedicated to the rules of the game. Whatever the rules of the game are, whatever you've been told the rules of the game are, you are a man of integrity and you will stick to it. And that stick-to-itiveness I think it's becoming a recurring theme up till today, where all the trouble that comes in your life is your stick-to-itiveness to this idea of what the rules of the game are. Do you think you would have played ball back then? Was something else motivating you? Like, what was it? Was it your experiences in Russia? Was it your father? Was it your love for America? Was it nationalism? What was it? Because I've heard you talk about religion. I mean, a lot of no offense, but a lot of vets, a lot of people who've had these experiences become very spiritual and weird. You're not like some religious nut. You're not. But what's
I don't want to
motivating
insult
you?
anybody, but I'm the opposite of a religious person.
Yeah.
I'm not an atheist. I don't claim to be an atheist.
No.
But I don't believe in organized religion.
Right.
I believe in the frailty of man. I don't trust other humans to tell me about God. If there is a God, I don't know what to call this power up there. I do believe that none of this happened by accident. I do believe that there's a force out there that created all this for a reason. I'm searching for that reason. I don't trust man to tell me about God. And I know that that's blasphemy to Christians,
go
to
ahead, man.
Muslims,
No, it's
but
already fine.
it's where I'm coming from.
Yeah.
I trust myself. I trust my heart, and I'm constantly learning. I'm just trying to learn as much about life. Unfortunately, the older I get, I'm running out of time. But
No,
I will tell
Allah
you
bless
this:
you in
that,
your efforts and in this independent inquiry for divine and actualized truth. But what is the driving moral force then? Is it your father's
well,
lessons? Is it your
yeah,
love for American history? What is it?
it's I grew up the developmental years of my childhood. As a youth, you see your parents, you think, but you can't put things in perspective. It's not until you get around 10, 11, 12 that you start to be able to absorb things and put things in perspective. And when that happened, I was in Hawaii, which even though it's a state, I grew up. I have to tell you, I mean, I was the only white, not the only, but I was one of the only white kids in an all non-white school that hated white people. And so I got in 3 fights a day. I mean, literally, from the moment I arrived at school to the moment I left, I was in fights because they did not like white people. And I had to learn how to adapt to that. Then I moved to Turkey, where outside of the United States, Turkey was a nation in turmoil in the 70s. There was violence. For me, it was the Wild West. I loved it. I went there and I learned the language. I learned the culture. I threw myself into studying this. It was the most adventurous couple years of my life because it's just wild. Tanks in the street, soldiers shooting guys, bandits running down the street shooting. You're like, holy cow, this is great, and the food's great, and the people are great, and the culture's great, and the history's great. I did a special project to study this. Pardon?
Have you been back to Turkey recently?
I have not to that level. I need to go back and visit Turkey from the ground up again. I've transited through Istanbul. I've gone into Istanbul, but I want to get to Ankara. I want to get to.
Do you revisit Barishmanko once in a while, just on the radio? Do you revisit Barishmanko once in a while on the radio or something? Barishmanko,
I don't.
The disco track. You don't know? Maybe I thought in the 70s. Maybe he's a big disco guy from Turkey.
I need to actually, because my life is so busy. Turkey isn't my focus anymore.
Right,
I study Erdogan, I study the AKP, I study what's going on, but I like to put boots on the ground. I want to go in there and I want to sit down in the chayhana and I want to drink tea with the Turks. I want to go out and talk to them. I want to meet them. I want to come into their homes. That's how I learn about people. I don't like the long distance, but Turkey was wonderful, but it's not America. And so what happens is the appreciation I got for America, for my homeland, was long distance. Again, you say the things that defined me. When we moved to Turkey, initially we had invaded Cyprus in 1974, and the United States had put sanctions on Turkey. And my dad was going to Turkey as an advisor to the Turkish Air Force, and the Turkish government started to put restrictions on the Americans because of the sanctions. And initially, one of the restrictions was family members aren't allowed to go to Turkey. It's too dangerous. At the last second, they changed it. And so my family went to Turkey. But we lived in the economy. We lived in downtown Ankara in a Turkish apartment with the wonderful Turkish neighbors. I mean, I loved it. But there was a base where we went to school, a Defense Department school, and that's where the headquarters units were and saw all that. The Turks didn't allow us to fly the American flag on this base after the sanctions. They said no American flag. On July 4th, 1976, the bicentennial, 200 years anniversary of America, the Turks said, we'll let you raise the flag today. And the entire American community came together. And we did what Americans do. We had picnics, we played softball, we had, we were just a celebration of our bicentennial. And then the American flag went up and they played the Star Spangled Banner. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. People were sobbing like babies. We love that flag, that symbol of our country so much. And we just sat there united as Americans saying, we love this symbol. And I'm sitting there as a kid, this is 76, I was 15 years old. And I'm looking around going, this is the America I love, pure love for a symbol of our nation. We love this country so much. It doesn't mean we hate Turkey. We didn't hate Turkey. But we realized that there was a difference between this and Turkey, that America stands for something that isn't this. It doesn't make us better or worse. It makes us different. It separates us. And then I moved to Germany, and here it got real. See, in Turkey, it was a grand adventure, and the people I lived with, their fathers did weird jobs, like they ran a nuclear seismic detection station to study whether Soviet nuclear tests. They ran a SIGINT thing to listen to Soviet. It's all spy versus spy stuff because the Cold War. Then we'd go to the Black Sea, and I'd look across the Black Sea, and you can't see it, but you'd say, over there's the enemy. Literally, right over there's the enemy. That's where the Soviets are. Oh my God, we're so close. And then we moved to Germany, and it's a different thing. This is Germany in 1977. East and West Germany were separated. There were literally hundreds of thousands of Soviets on their side, hundreds of thousands of us ready to go to war on a daily basis. You woke up, when I went to school, fighter planes are flying over your head all the time, helicopters, tanks, everything. It was war footing the whole time. You were ready to fight the Soviets. I grew up with that. And the Germans, were pro-American, and you develop a new appreciation. You say, this thing called America, which to be honest, I didn't understand because I had lived in Turkey and Germany. To me, America is just a symbol. It's something worth dying for. And all these people here worth dying. It's us against them. Boom. And so that drove me, this ultra-nationalism, this love of a symbol, the love of a theory, not necessarily the reality, because I wasn't in America. I wasn't living in America. I was living abroad. The other thing, I'll give you an example of my father, a man of great honor and integrity. He's the guy that taught me, I went on a bus, and if I'm seated and a woman comes in, there was no, I'm up, seated. I open doors. Yes, sir. I address all my elders as yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir. Be respectful the entire time. But the biggest lesson he taught me as a kid is I got in a fight in high school. Three guys were saying disparaging things about my sister, 1 year younger than me. And I said, you can't talk about my sister like that. And they talked back, and I got in a huge fight with them, and I was beating the living dog poop out of them. And they pulled me down to the principal's office. And I remember it was Doc Elstrand, and he had me there, and he said, what was this fight about? And then he said, well, what if what they're saying about your sister is accurate? I went across the table and tried to punch him right at that point in time. And I had to be restrained. They had to call in the police. And I said, I'm going to kill you. You can't talk about my sister that way. I will rip your head off. I will do all this stuff. And he's like, oh my God. So he calls my dad. And he says, I have your son in the office. My dad says, okay. And he goes, he was in a fight. My dad says, so why are you calling me? Well, your son was in a fight. I understand that. Why are you calling me? Well, we want to let you know your son was in a fight. My dad said, what are the rules? Are you allowed to get in a fight in school? The guy said, no. My dad said, what are the consequences of getting in a fight? He said, suspension. My dad said, why are you calling me? He said, I don't understand. He said, if my son got in a fight and you say the rules are that if you get in a fight, you get suspended, suspend my son. Why are you calling me? So I got a 3-day suspension. I came home and I was furious. I was so mad. I said, well, you betrayed me. He said, sit down. He said, first of all, if you hadn't defended your sister's honor, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I'd be so disappointed in you. He said, I've never been more proud of you in my life. You stood up for the honor of the family. You stood up for the honor of your sister. You did the right thing. I said, okay, but why didn't you step in? He said, no. There are consequences for your actions. Just because you do the right thing doesn't mean you don't pay a price. You did the right thing, but it's not the right thing if you get away with it. Yes. It's the right thing because it was the right thing to do, but now you have to pay the price. The rules are no fights. You made a decision to get in a fight. You made a decision to break the rules, and I support that decision. You were defending the honor of your sister. But now you must pay the price, or else your actions are meaningless. if you stand up and do the right thing and you don't pay a price, you get away. It's too easy. He said, doing the right thing is sometimes the hardest thing in the world. And I went, all right. Next morning, I'm suspended from school 3 days. My dad would leave to work early in the morning. Boom, 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 knock on the door. I said, what? He goes, get out of bed. I said, well, I don't have to go to school. He goes, oh, you think you're getting a holiday? No, you're suspended. That's punishment. Come out here. He had the bucket, the soap. I had to wash the car, wax the car, vacuum the car, clean the house, clean the yard, do the whole thing. By the time he came home, he would inspect everything. For 3 days, I was a slave to him, doing everything at home because it's punishment. It's not meant to be a free ride. And at the end of the 3 days, I returned to school. That was one of the biggest lessons of my life. The biggest lesson of my life is, do what's right, but be prepared to pay the price, that there's no free ride, that, you have to pay the consequences for your actions. And that was a huge lesson. It guided me in everything I've done. But the other thing I'll say this is the Marine Corps. There's a lot of people out there that, they hear the term Marine Corps and they equate it to, American hegemony, American aggression, American violence. The Marine Corps is an institution of honor. When you join the Marine Corps, from day one, you're told you will not betray the Marine Corps, that the Marine Corps stands for something. That's what makes it separate from everybody else. The Marine Corps is an institution of honor, of integrity. You will do the right thing, and you will be prepared to die to defend the honor of the Marine Corps. Literally, you don't surrender, you don't retreat, you do the mission. You don't betray the trust given to you by committing war crimes. You do the mission you're told to do. You obey the rules. Obey the rules. That was the important thing about the Marine Corps is know what your mission is, know what the rules are, obey the rules, and don't allow the rules to be broken, to maintain integrity. The Marine Corps drilled that into me from day one. Day one. It's what drives you. Trust me, when you're in the middle of a 15-mile run with 45 pounds on your back and you're dying of heat exhaustion and you're getting ready to collapse, in the back of your mind is, don't betray the Marine Corps. Don't quit. Do not quit. Do not quit. Keep going. Do not quit. Do not betray. It wasn't about me. It's about the Marine Corps. Don't betray the Marine Corps. So, and when you're out there wearing a uniform, you take a look at people transiting in the airports. You look at the soldiers, the sailors, and the airmen. And their uniforms are all sort of, because they were on an airplane, and then they just look like a bag of rags. Marines always get off, go to the bathroom, looking good because you're a Marine. As you present yourself to the public, it's not about you. It's about the public's going to see a Marine in uniform, and that Marine better shine. That Marine better be there and so all these combine to make me who I am. What I did in the Soviet Union was all derived from that, honor and integrity, not abusing the trust given to you. During the Gulf War, I was given a mission. I could have quit. I didn't have to do this mission. It was a very difficult mission, but I was a Marine, and it was, no, you will be aggressive and you will accomplish this mission. And when I became a weapons inspector, even though I was technically working for the United Nations, I was a Marine. And I had to be a man of honor, a man of integrity. One last story just about the importance of this. In 1998, we had a number of major confrontations with the Iraqis that I played a central role in. And in fact, the Iraqis in January of 1998 stopped cooperating with my team. They accused me of being a CIA agent, of trying to provoke a war and everything. And the system, United Nations, and the United States and the Security Council said, we can't allow the Iraqis to dictate who our chief inspectors are. And so we were going to send a team in to test the new modalities. And I was going to be the chief inspector because we were telling the Iraqis, you don't get a vote. You don't get to tell us I'm going to be doing this. And this was a very, very confrontational inspection. We were going to the places the Iraqis did not want us to go. One of the places, though, that was picked was the Ministry of Defense. And I said, well, we don't necessarily want to go there. That's not on my target list. You remember, I do the intelligence. They said, no, we're going to do that because Tariq Aziz had said that if you go there, it will be war. I said, but why do we want to go there? Because we can't let Tariq Aziz build a red line. I said, okay, I understand that, but there's got to be an arms control reason for us to go there. I have to be looking for something. They said, well, documents. I said, what documents? Normally, I have intelligence about the existence of a specific document that I know what the contents are. They're like, no, we're going to do this theoretically. And this went all the way up to the White House. I remember sitting in the Ambassador Bill Richardson's office at the U.S. mission. My boss, Richard Butler, Charles Dulfer, a deputy ambassador, the head of the CIA liaison, and they sat there and they drew it out. They said, Scott, you have to inspect the Ministry of Defense by this day because we have to begin bombing Iraq by this day. I said, what do you mean bomb Iraq? Well, yeah, no, because they're not going to let you in, so then we're going to bomb Iraq. I said, but what if they let me in? They said, they're not going to let you in. I said, you guys do know that I'm the chief inspector, right? They said, yes. So my job is to do inspections, right? Yes. Okay. So off I go. And I mean, it's some funny story. Madeleine Albright didn't want me to go. She tried to stop it. The CIA blocked her, da-da-da. Madeleine Albright now is in France, meeting with the French foreign minister. And she elbows him. And she goes, hey, I'm about to get a phone call. What do you mean? The missiles are going to be flying very soon. How do you know that? Our team is in there and the Iraqis are going to block the team. They said, but how do you know it's not going to be resolved? She said, the fix is in. We control the chief inspector. Well, I was the chief inspector. Nobody controls me. I'm controlled by the mission, by the integrity of the mission. I was there, and sure enough, they blocked us, and it was ugly. I sat down with Amir Rashid. He's the oil minister, who's also ran the weapons instruction mass instruction programs. And I said, General, you know what's happening here. He said, I know what's happening. You guys are provoking us. I said, yes, absolutely, we are. I said, but you have to let me in. I said, we can't let you in. This is the Ministry of Defense. But you have no choice, I said, because if you don't, the missiles are going to fly. And he said, we understand that. I said, no, you don't. Because this time it's real. They're going to kill you. They're going to kill everybody here. This is the beginning of the end of Iraq. I said, you have to let me in, or else everything we've done for the last several years is meaningless. And he said, but this is the most sensitive spot. I said, I understand that, but you have to trust me. You have to trust me that I'm going to do my job. My job is to look for weapons of mass destruction. You have to trust me to do my job. You have to let me do my job. And he went and talked to Saddam, talked to Tariq Aziz. And you know what? Long story short, they let me in with my team. We spent 16 hours going through that building. The most sensitive sites I took charge of. I was led to the Minister of Defense's office, where the big board is with all the sensitive stuff behind a curtain. They said, we don't want you to see that board. I said, I have to see that board, because if I don't see that board, people are going to say behind that board were the secrets about where they're hiding weapons of mass destruction. You have to let me see that board. They go, but it's very sensitive. I said, you got to trust me. They unveiled it. I had my interpreter. I said, what does this say? What does this say? What does that say? I said, okay, none of that's weapons. Put the curtains back up. We're done. We walked out. And we walked out of that Ministry of Defense building, and we averted a war. There was supposed to be a war that night. But because I sat down with the Iraqis and said, let me do my job, and they trusted me, we stopped the war. U.S. government was so mad at me, furious. They wanted my head on a platter. But I didn't work for the U.S. government. Remember, I told you at the beginning, I said, what's my job? They said to implement Security Council Resolution 687. I did that day. I implemented the resolution. And I think the Iraqis at that moment realized that I may be a tough guy. I may be somebody they don't agree with in terms of what I'm doing, but I was a man of honor, a man of integrity. And I proved to them that day that I could be trusted. The shame was that was the last inspection I ever led into Iraq, because the United States government at that point in time shut down everything that I was doing because they felt that I had betrayed America. But how can I betray America when America tells me my orders are to implement Security Council Resolution 687, and that's what I did.
No, so definitely you're an honorable man for doing that. And I have two follow-up questions to that. They're a bit harsh, but did you feel like one of them is a positive thing. Do you feel like a man doing his job at the right time, at the right place, where like you were representing the American government, but technically you were there to implement the UN article? Do you feel like a man like that, and this is a historical event, a real event, can delay, if not stop a war? Because the political intent for the war was there. Eventually, when it did happen, and as you mentioned, that was the last major inspection you did, and they shut down your whole project, obviously, because the political end of the and the CIA interest might not be, they might not have liked what you have done, and you were just there to sort of just, in Urdu, we would say khana puri, just like to fill in the blanks and fill in the gaps as somebody's doing their job. But in actuality, they have the fix in, and the missiles are going to fly at any second. Eventually, did you feel like that trust you had in a system where you could do your job and delay the worst, delay the inevitable, or even stop the inevitable? Did you feel like it was all for nothing when they did start the Iraq War? Was that a big blow to your ego, to your personal convictions, to your trust in America, to your trust in the state? What were the feelings like? What was the process like for you?
Well, look, I'm human as anybody else. And, again, I fall back on what my father taught me. You have to be willing to accept the consequences for the CIA, that if I played the game, I was going to get a medal. That if I played the game, I was going to get a job, or get a promotion, to play the game. And I said, but I am playing the game. I'm playing the game of honor and integrity. I'm playing the game that I agreed to when I first started. Now you want to change the game, and I'm not willing to do that because that violates the assurances I gave people that I would be true to this objective. I knew in taking the stance that I did that I wasn't going to be rewarded, that I would be punished, and that the punishment would be harsh. When I resigned, again, inspections to let me do my job, they said, well, we can't let you do your job the way you want to do it. You have to do it this way. And I said, but I can't do that. And the CIA guy, who I was very friendly with, by the way, he was not a bad guy, always treated me with respect and right. He said, I respect what you're doing, but you do know that the moment you put in that resignation, that the FBI is going to destroy you, that the U.S. government is going to destroy you. They're going to destroy you, and they're going to destroy your family, that they'll never forgive you for this. And I said, so to me, ideals and values enshrined in the Constitution that I took an oath to uphold. But, am I disappointed? Yeah. But I blame myself. Because I was uniquely empowered with 7 years of experience that nobody else had. I knew the truth. And I always blame myself by saying, when you resigned, what more could I have done to get the truth out to the American people? What more could I have done to empower people with knowledge and information so that they knew that there were no weapons of mass destruction?
Would you have been legally able to do that? Would you have been legally able to do that? As a former serviceman and a weapons inspector, would you have legally been able to do just that? Because you tried with some of those documentaries and you made media appearances and you organized Journal 11. How legal was all of that?
Well, the U.S. government tried to stop me, but because let's talk. When I first started working for the United Nations, I was a United Nations employee, badge carrying, paid by the United Nations. And then in 1994, I went back to the Marine Corps because, again, the politics of the United Nations, to be honest, I didn't like being in a position where I was being accused of betraying my country by doing my job. And I had people saying, oh, you're not red, white, and blue anymore. You're blue. You work for the UN. I said, yes, I work for the UN. That's my instructions. Yeah, you're not a real American, da-da-da. And so we got to the point where I felt I wasn't being useful in the disarmament process. So I went back to the Marine Corps. But then the United Nations said we can't do the job without him. He has to come back. And so I went back for a brief period of time as a Marine. But then the Marines said, we don't want to have you there full time. If you're going to be there, you can't be there as a Marine. You have to be there as something else. So the CIA stepped in and they created a contract vehicle with the Department of Defense, where the CIA provided the Department of Defense money, and they used that money to pay my salary as a contractor to the United Nations. But again, I told them I will only do that if the same rules apply, that the rules are the same. They said, no, the rules are the same. You work for the United Nations. You're just being paid by the U.S. government differently. But the point is, I never, during this period of time, was an employee of the U.S. government, and I didn't have a security clearance. I was in the possession of no classified information because you couldn't be. It goes to the UN and becomes declassified. So when I spoke out, I wasn't violating any laws. The U.S. government tried to say, no, you were a contractor. I said, yes, but it's an unclassified contract, no classified information. You have no control of me. And we actually fought them, and I won. And so I used every resource I could bring to bear to try and educate people. I wasn't constrained in what I could say or talk about. Sometimes I would hesitate to say things because I didn't want to put people's lives in danger. If people were involved in sensitive programs, I wouldn't name their names. I wouldn't name their organizations, but I would talk about the work that we did. I did so very openly. And it had an impact. I mean, people were listening, but it didn't stop the war. That was the frustrating thing for me, that we ended up going to war on a lie. And I always ask myself, if I had done it a little bit differently, if I had not been so aggressive, if I had learned to work with the other side to make compromises. But to me, you can't compromise on truth. The truth is the truth. The facts are the facts. And I thought that by putting the facts on the table the way I did, people would absorb them and do the right thing. And I was wrong. And that was very depressing, very depressing. I have to admit that when we went to war, I went through a very bad, dark period of my life because I was just so depressed, because I felt that God, whatever God is, had put me in a position to stop this war, and I failed. I failed my job to stop this war. That there's a reason why I was given this job, given this opportunity. It was to stop all this, and I felt that I had done a good job in stopping this war. But in the end, we went to war, and I took personal responsibility. I've since then matured and understand that sometimes things happen that you can't control, and it's not your fault. But I have to tell you, at that time, it was a very dark period of my life, because I took personal responsibility for my inability to stop the war, because I was empowered with the truth. I knew what the truth was, and somehow I failed to get that message across to people.
It's some heavy stuff, and we appreciate that you've been so open and honest about your more personal experiences that formed you, that molded you, and made you the man you are, and allowed you to perform the duties that you did. The truth is a heavy burden, and you shouldered it well, honorably. As somebody is a complete, outside, objective observer. I mean, I have skin in the game. I'm part of the Muslim world, but in the sense of I have no skin in the game when it comes to you as an individual, I can say that I think you conducted yourself fairly honorably, sir, and you should be proud of that. And you'd always be welcome in any part of the Muslim world. I can guarantee it. I can speak on behalf of all 2 billion of us. On the other hand, you have made sure that I never get to see America from coast to coast, because I am now on some sort of watch list. I can guarantee it. So thanks for that, Mr. Scott Ritter. I had always dreamed
that will change.
I'd always dreamed of renting a car and driving across America, but this is it's neither here nor there. Out of the more meat and potatoes of what's going on right now, we're smack dab in the middle of a major shift in global alliances, and there's no other way to describe it, sir. It's multipolarity. It's a little bit of Russia. It's a little bit of China. It's about U.S. making a strategic retreat back into the Americas, into the Western Hemisphere. Who knows, right? I mean, you hear some people arguing one way. It's the end of globalization. You have war hawks, like these neocon characters like Peter Zehan. I don't know if you know about this guy. He's arguing about it's the end of globalization. It's a new age in the American empire, and you have this whole other narrative of the axis of resistance. Something I'm very cynical about as well. I'm not as deeply convinced of that, where you have the anti-imperial sort of international left galvanizing around Iran, around Russia, potentially China, a lot of the North African and the Horn of Africa, the smaller states. You see that sort of rebellious attitude against the global order for trade. And in smack dab in the middle for us as Muslims specifically is the issue of Palestine. And I would say the secondly would be the issue of the Sudan. And I'm sure you're fully aware of both of these. The Gulf countries primarily have been Western satellites for us in the Muslim world. And they have squandered the collective resource that we have, the oil, the gas, the reserves. They've squandered the collective resource of our civilization. And, they've created a mess of things. And I'm not going to absolve the Iranis fully of their role in this big mess. But it seems to me that they've come out looking better optically. That's all I'll say. the optics of what Iran is slightly better than a Saudi or a UAE or a Bahrain or a Kuwait, as you would say, the wrong side of the Arabs, right? The bad Arabs. Um, Given these global shifts and given your role and the ideas you have about Russia, as an American, do you think it's a problem, the role that Russia has been playing in the Middle East? Does that bother you? What's happened in Syria, the role Iran's played in Syria? So the Sunni world is very conflicted, where they have sympathies for Iran with their anti-imperial sentiment on ground, but at the same time they're very cynical of them, primarily for religious reasons as well as for political historical reasons, for their role in Syria, for their role in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and their role in Lebanon. So what do you make of this? Is it jambalaya? Is that what you call it? Jambalaya is that what Americans call it?
Well, nothing happens in a vacuum. And I don't want to be accused of grossly oversimplifying things, but when you take a look at why Iran and, for instance, the Shia of southern Lebanon have such a close relationship, it deals with the Shia faith, with clerics coming from the heart of the Shia faith to southern Lebanon, and that develops familial relationships as intermarriages take place. That when Israel invaded and occupied southern Lebanon in 1982, even prior to that, the early incursions into the Litani area, there's relationships, and that led to the Iranian government becoming very close with the Shia of southern Lebanon as they start to resist the Israeli occupation, and then this morphs into something more formal. And there it is. And then Hezbollah emerges out of Amal and becomes this resistance organization that has political ambitions. So today, if we look at it, a snapshot today, you go, oh, well, Hezbollah. And if you don't appreciate where Hezbollah came from, what the roots of Hezbollah are, maybe you can get a misinterpretation of what Hezbollah. You can be susceptible to outside influences on trying to determine how you assess Hezbollah, et cetera. I take a more realistic appreciation of Hezbollah. I feel that Hezbollah is very organic to the reality of Lebanon. And as such, for instance, on Syria, on the one hand, if again, I'm not a religious person and I can't claim to be a student in terms of strict academic discipline of the Islamic faith, but I'm familiar with the region, the religions, etc. The Alawites are a sect, might be the wrong word, but they are a derivative of the Shia faith that many Shia believe is almost heretical, meaning that they
do believe they're heretical. Yeah, the mainstream Shia belief is they're heretical. Yeah.
Yeah, and so so the concept of that the Alawites and the Shia of Iran are automatically meant to be united is absurd. Actually, I think it's the opposite. The same thing with Ansarallah and the Houthi. They have a different understanding of derivative of the Shia faith that many in Iran would think is heretical. It's oh no, these guys aren't to be supported; they're to be condemned. But then you take a look at geopolitics, and you take a look at, I guess alliances of necessity. Syria played an important role in facilitating Iran's involvement in support of Hezbollah, and so then when in 2000, I guess what was the droughts of 2006, 2007 in Syria that devastated the rural countryside, and many Syrians blamed the Syrian government for failing to step up and do the right thing. A vacuum of influence was created that was exploited by Saudis, who sent in clerics who helped and money to rebuild villages.
So it's an organic response when you had things like the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, who genuinely are sick of a minority, sort of autocratic rule in Syria, and the abuses that had happened with the Syrian people, also the religious gripes being the majority against a minority. And then the Saudi, they inject into that vacuum a venom that creates eventually what is
Right.
now ISIS. And so right, I understand what you mean, that there's a lot of alliances of necessity that came out of the Syrian conflict, and it,
It's
it
not
happened
it's
the
not
way it
black and
did.
white. It's
No.
very nuanced, very gray, very complicated.
But does it bother you the way, like, so as somebody who was like a staunch Soviet, you were trained to kill, right? You were trained to fight the Soviets, and now whatever rendition of the Russian Empire this is of this, you yourself described it as a coup, the coup in the 90s, right? And the way Vladimir Putin has conducted himself in Russia, he's an effective leader. Don't get me wrong. I don't believe in any of this Western rhetoric that he's a fool and he's a warlord, and he's an effective a leader for the Russian people, and he's done a great job at managing that country. But at the same time, there are certain political cliques and agendas that they do have. When you see, have you killed the sort of that element of yourself where you don't believe in any longer the sort of American hegemony, where you're willing to relinquish influence in the Middle East in exchange for a more stable peace? Have you gone beyond that point?
The problem is, when I joined the Marine Corps, I was part of the Rapid Deployment Force. I literally had my bags packed in my home, ready to deploy instantly to the Middle East. The big scenario we trained for was the Soviets coming in through Iran, trying to make a drive for Bandar Abbas or Chabahar, and our job was to land in Iran and block their advances. The other thing we trained for is if Iran broke through Basra and seized seized Basra, then pivoted on Kuwait and was threatening the eastern Saudi oil fields, we were to intervene and block there. This is what we trained for. These were the two primary missions we trained for, and I believed in them. I believed that America was a force of stability, that we were there to maintain alliances, maintain a status quo that was necessary for the security of America in the world. I believed in that. But I believed in it not as a genuine expert on the Middle East, but as a guy I was going to kill people. I was just a tool to do this, but I believed in that. The Gulf War changed everything. Because as I said, I was convinced going in, the Gulf War being Desert Storm, we're fighting the wrong Arabs. I felt that the Iraqis, and then when I went to Iraq, you remember I talked about how I went to the Soviet Union and I developed a new understanding, appreciation for the Russian people. When you go to Iraq as a weapons inspector, you have inherent powers. I mean, the Iraqis accused us of being almost colonial in our approach, because we had this mandate that allowed us to do anything we wanted to do. And as a result, you get to go to places, see things. You get to see Iraq differently. It's not a controlled tourist experience. You are literally injecting yourself into Iraq. And I took advantage of that to learn about the Iraqi people, about Iraqi culture. I tried to learn about the people I was interacting with. To study Saddam's security infrastructure, I actually studied the tribal hierarchy of Iraq to learn about tribal relationships, familial relationships, because to study Saddam's security, you had to learn about, I'm going to get this wrong, but the Khas, maybe the five family circles around that, blood is thicker than water, security is family oriented. To penetrate that security is almost impossible. And I had to learn about the tribal relationships and things. And what I realized in doing this is that America doesn't know anything about the Middle East. I would meet with CIA people, State Department people, and they had a very superficial understanding of Iraq and the reality of Iraqi society, the role that Saddam played in trying to take this artificial entity created by the British in post-World War I and turn it into a nation. Again, I'm not defending everything Saddam did, but I understand, I'm able to put it into context how do you take Kurds, Shia, and Sunni and turn them into a state where everybody identifies with the singularity of an Iraqi state? So I didn't impart evil intent on everything Saddam did. I tried to understand why Saddam did what he did, And then I would do the same thing with Iran. I would do the same thing. And what I realized is that America is the problem, not the solution. That because we don't understand the region, we don't understand the intricate nuances of how the region works, we're trying to impose our will in a way that is inconsistent with what the people of the region want. And where we succeed is when we put in puppets, when we put in governments that literally are tools of America. And that's how, I don't mean to insult people, but that's what the reality of the Gulf Arab states are. What made Saddam different is that he wasn't a puppet. What makes Bashar al-Assad different, he's not a puppet. I'm not saying he's perfect, I'm saying he's not a puppet. And so I don't support.
But don't you think that on the flip side, he is a puppet, but the puppeteer is maybe Russia or Iran? You see the difference? Like,
I think it's more complicated than that, again, because of the...
Sure, I agree with you. Yeah. It is more complicated than that. And even the Saudi Gulf state, even the Gulf states, while being more puppets, have some sort of autonomy with their decision making. I understand the argument you're making, but wouldn't it be a good guy versus bad guy? Might as well be the good guys kind of argument. Might as well be...
If we're the good guy.
Yeah, that's...
If we're the good guy.
Right.
The problem is I don't view the United States as the good guy in the region. What have we done in the region that's good?
You help us get nukes, man. I mean, I at this point.
Well, as a guy who's opposed to nuclear weapons, I don't think that's a good idea.
I'm messing with you. Okay, you didn't help us. You looked the other way. The Americans looked the other way when the Pakistanis developed their nukes maybe as a gift for their efforts in Afghanistan, some sort of parting gift. But the day you wake up and Pakistan's in a nuclear war, you won't appreciate those nukes. No, I suspect not.
Yeah. So I think it's a double-edged sword that'll come back to haunt you if you can't find a way to control.
It already has. The half of the rough treatment that we get from the Americans now is primarily because we have the nukes now. So it's a damned if you do.
The other question I have to ask is
damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Is it America's role?
Haji?
Yes. Is that America's role? Is that the right role for America?
Maybe not.
Who made America king? Who made America the power broker? Who, did you say, oh, we look around the world and we select America, or did America say, we're here, you have to deal with us? I think half the problem is that America is imposing its will. And it's imposing its will based not upon the needs of Pakistan, but on the needs of America, or the needs of the Gulf Arab states. And as a result, solutions to problems that you might have been able to take to prevent acceleration, to prevent destabilization, you weren't allowed to take because you had to make sure everything complies with an American vision of how we want the region to be. And I can tell you right now, we're not friends of Pakistan. We don't care about the Pakistani people. We're not doing this to help you. Everything we've done has hurt you. You may think that it helps you, but it doesn't. In the long term, it hurts you. Why? Because you're not your own boss.
We're fully aware of it. Yeah, we're fully aware of it.
And that's my thing. Now, you talk about Russia. Russia was invited to Syria. Now, you can say, I don't support Bashar al-Assad. That's a different argument. But Russia was invited to come to Syria to do a specific task, to save Bashar al-Assad from the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and al-Nusra
and legitimate freedom fighters as well. There was a legitimate movement. We can't deny that. It's not all. I think this sort of Wahhabi sort of argument is a bit hyperbolic.
Well, but the legitimate freedom fighters eventually...
Obviously, money talks, right? Money talks. The Saudi money talks, and it took over the whole movement. I agree with you.
And remember, they might have started as legitimate freedom fighters, but the second they start working for America, they become a tool of American hegemony. Right. And they lose the purity.
The moment they start receiving weapons from the Turks and the Israelis, and you know how it works.
Yeah. So I'm not denying that there wasn't legitimate opposition to Bashar al-Assad. What I'm saying is that the way that opposition developed corrupted it, which is why there isn't any viable homegrown opposition to Bashar al-Assad today. I think it's just been corrupted. The Russians, they played a role, but here's the thing: Russia got involved through invitation, but what it's morphed into because of geopolitical maneuvering is something different than what it was originally intended to be. And we can say the same thing about Sudan and what's happened in Sudan. It's a tragedy, first of all. But rather than create the condition to let the Sudanese people figure out a problem to Sudanese issues, we've turned Sudan into a geopolitical battleground where you have the Gulf Arab states, you have Egypt, you have Russia, you have the United States, all sitting there playing a chess game. But to us, when we remove a pawn from the table, it's just a chess game. But for the Sudanese people, that's 10,000 dead. Every pawn that goes down is 10,000 dead. We don't care about the Sudanese people. Nobody's doing this because they care about the Sudanese people. And now that the Sudanese people are going through horrific humanitarian problems, this is my approach on life right now. When I solve a problem, when I seek to solve a problem, I no longer look at it from a top down where I say, this is America. How do we make this good for America? Because I believe that America doesn't care. If I thought that for a second we actually cared about you, if I thought for a second that that America takes the time to sit down and talk with you and say, what do you need? How can we help you? Tell me, if we do this, also to ask questions, if we do this, what happens? Okay, we do this, we give you this money, but then what happens? Is this a danger of altering the balance of power that exists? How can we do this that doesn't change the organic structure of Pakistan? Because it's up to Pakistan to make the decision.
I don't want to quote your competitors, but a former CIA analyst, Dr. Michael Scheuer, I've read some of his books as well. He said that I don't care if Mrs. Muhammad ever votes again. It doesn't matter none to me. And to quote him, he described Israel in particular, and I want to segue into this because I think it's the issue of the hour these days, is that it's such a burden on American foreign policy, more so than a Saudi, more so than the weapons, military, industrial, whatever complex. Just the entity that is Israel and their lobby groups, and the way that they've dominated the American media, academic, and political landscape, as the Zionist entity is. And you've worked with the Israelis. You've worked with them. I've heard you talk about them. I've seen your work speaking about specifically your life in Israel. They're wonderful people. They're all human beings. You respect them. You respect their culture. You've enjoyed it. What is it about Israel in particular that just drives your politicians crazy? I have no idea.
Boy, this is the part that's going to get you banned from the world.
Sorry. Fun fact, guys. This is where you pay 3,000 rupees, which is, pennies, peanuts at this point. What is it in dollars, guys? 3,000 rupees is like a couple of dollars, I guess. $1 or $2 maybe. You could buy a cup of coffee or you could pay for this, and you get to see exclusive interviews and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, go ahead, sir.
Well,
but you also see the other side of that influence, where they get to disparage anyone who goes against the Israeli project, who goes against the Zionist project. This is a very personal question, sir. So if you don't want to answer it, you can just say, I don't think this is appropriate. We'll cut it out. It won't even be in the thing. But you personally went through a phase where you were accused of something which I totally understand what that was, by the way. I knew immediately when I found out. I was like, that's when they, was that more domestic, or was that already something that, and is it unique to the Israelis, or is it something that the American government and other intelligence agencies within the state are also employing those kinds of tactics to compromise people? I mean, how did you deal with
well, first of all, let me just put it this way. I know what you're talking about.
Yes, sir.
And I went to prison for 3.5 years. I was sentenced to 5.5 years. But what I've said is this: I committed no crime.
Yes, sir.
That's an absolute statement of fact. No crime was committed. Did I behave honorably? Did I behave as a married man should behave? No, absolutely not. I told you I went through a very dark period of my life, and I did things that I'm ashamed of. But none of it was criminal. There was no criminal. They took advantage of, I think, my personal weakness. to manufacture a case, and then they unjustly prosecuted me.
When you say they, sir, do you mean any particular faction within the U.S. government, or?
Well, the problem is they hide behind what they call the color of law. So they put forward a local prosecutor and a local judge, and so they can say this is just done locally. The FBI was involved. There's no doubt about it. I believe that there are other entities involved. I believe that the Department of Justice was involved. It was political in nature. It was 100% a political.
So for the context for context for the audience, I'm just going to quickly go through it. You were accused of soliciting sexual relations with a minor.
Correct.
Right. And in actuality, this was through the cyber veil, basically through the computer. And in a lot of these cases, I want to provide the context for the audience is that the way that they honey trap someone is that they understand that if somebody's having particular emotional problems and they're maybe taking it out in a negative or a wrong sort of way, maybe it's drinking, maybe it's a vice like that, like drugs, and they figured that out, and then what they do is they present a young person who is basically borderline. So in our world, just being compromised with a woman outside of marriage would be enough. But in the Western world, they have to design it in a way where it breaks laws, and for you guys, the laws would be to show that you were engaged in any sexual activity with a minor. So that the whole trick of the prestige of the trick essentially is what is the difference between a 17-year-old and a 19-year-old?
It's even more. It's easier than that because first of all, there's no victim. There was no 17-year-old. There was no 15-year-old. There was no 16-year-old. The mechanism that of entrapment that they put in, I can't even call it entrapment because for entrapment to take place, I would have to believe that I'm committing a crime.
Right. It's not even sahi. Right, sir. Yeah.
And the fact of the matter is, this took place in an adults only forum, where everybody to be in the forum had to certify at least twice that they were an adult. And then this was a fantasy-driven interaction where the fantasy was exclusively that of the person on the other end. There was never adult, there was never a victim, there was no effort to meet, there was no, any of that kind of stuff. Should I have been doing it? Hell no. Okay, but I was in a very stupid period of my life, depressed. Is either that or put a bullet to my head. I mean, I was not going through a good thing. But there was no crime committed. What they do, though, is they exploit this to try and shame you. You see, that what they did is they came to me and I said, no crime was committed. I said, what are you doing? I mean, I told, as soon as the guy said I'm a police officer, I said, get the hell out of here. No crime was committed, and no crime was committed. But what they want to do is they because the shame associated with being in a chat room of that nature, et cetera, is such that they're like, well, he doesn't want anything to go public. So they then pile on the charges. They tried to put me in jail for 40 years. I said, are you crazy? And then they come back and they say, well, we'll cut a deal. Just admit to one charge. There will be no prison time, parole only. I said, yeah, but that's me admitting guilt for something I didn't do. They said, yes, but everything else will go away. You won't go to jail. I said, you don't understand. I didn't commit a crime. Yeah, I'm not proud of this. I really wouldn't want to talk about anybody, but I'm not going to plead guilty to something I didn't do. They said, but then we're going to go to trial and you're going to go to jail. And I said, well, I'd rather go to jail as an innocent man than plead guilty to something I didn't do. And so we went to trial, and I don't want to get into all the details, but They knew I was innocent. They suppressed, let's just put it this way. It's a computer-based crime, right? Because it's all internet. My computer now becomes the equivalent of the gun, the murder thing. I wanted to give them my computer and say, go through it and you'll see no crime was committed and there's no history of crimes. There's nothing. They wouldn't accept the computer, the prosecutors. I then had to hire a former FBI guy who actually invented crimes against children. He's the guy who and all he did is put people in jail. And I said, I want to hire you to go through my computer. He said, why? I said, because no one can doubt your integrity. You put people in jail. You exist to put people like me who committed these crimes in jail. I want you to go through the computer and tell them there's nothing here. He said, you don't want to do this. I said, why not? He said, where there's smoke, there's fire, meaning that they've accused you of something you think you're not. I will find it. I will find it. If it's there, I will find it. I said, good. You're not going to find anything. My lawyer didn't want to do this. I insisted. We paid the guy a lot of money. He went through the computer. He came back and he said, for the first time in my he wrote a letter to the judge. He said, for the first time in my 25-year experience in law enforcement, I have gone through a computer where somebody said they were innocent. He said, he is innocent. There's nothing here, blah, 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 blah. The judge wouldn't allow him to testify at my trial, and the judge wouldn't allow the computer to be entered as evidence. That's, again, like accusing me of murder, but not allowing the murder weapon to be introduced as evidence, not allowing anything. That's the way this trial went. It was totally cooked up, and, it is what it is. I went to jail. And here's the other thing I'll tell you about American prisons and sex offenders, because I was accused of being a sex offender. They kill sex offenders in prison. That's what they wanted to happen to me. They wanted me to be killed. I remember entering the system. They said, don't tell anybody about what you're in here for. I said, are you kidding? I've been all over TV. Can't hide it. So when I showed up at the final state prison, I took the opposite approach. I went to the head of the gangs. They're the ones that kill you. They police the prisons. The Crips, the Bloods, the Latin Kings. And I went to them and I
How
showed
close
them
did you come to converting to Islam in jail, by the way?
No, but I'll tell you stories about that too. I didn't convert to Islam or Christian. There's no born again because I was innocent. Sometimes guilty people have to have a religious.
Then maybe a Nazi gang, sir.
Pardon?
Maybe a Nazi gang, maybe an Aryan white gang.
No, they had those too, but no, I took a different approach. What I did is I went to them and I said, "Here's my paperwork. This is the entire case file. Read it. And if you want to kill me, let's go out back and you can try your best, but I'm going to take at least 4 of you with me. Because I'm not one of these people that rolls over and plays dead. Read it, come back." They read it and they came back and they said, "You were framed." I said, "I know." So when the heads of the gangs who kill pedophiles say you were framed, but then the funny thing is they said, "Okay, we won't let anybody attack you for your crimes." But he said, "That doesn't mean that you're in. He said, you got to be you. You got to earn respect in prison." I had to go out on the basketball court, and I'm doing this as a 50-plus-year-old man, and play basketball with 20-year-old gangsters who are in there for murder, and earn their respect. And that means combat basketball, elbows to the face, kicks, the whole work. And I had to earn my respect. And by the time I finished, I could play basketball with these guys. I could walk. Not only that, but they came to me for help because they saw how hard I was fighting my case. They said, "Well, could you help us?" I got a guy a new trial. I got another guy sent home early. I helped other people make adjustments. And this is supposedly illegal in prison. You're not allowed to be a prisoner. The prison warden and the block, they said Ritter's allowed to help them because, see, I didn't charge people money or anything like that. I just simply said, "I will help you." And so this is no kidding. When I'd be in my prison cell, there'd be a line of inmates waiting to come in and meet with me to talk about their case. And the guards were freaking out. They're like, "You can't do that." But then the warden said, "No, he's allowed to do that." And I left prison with the full respect of the inmates, the guards, and the warden. I was sentenced to 5.5 years. You can't be paroled unless you admit your guilt. That's a rule. I was paroled just short of 3 years. You say, "Well, how then? Did you admit your guilt?" I said, "No." See, I went to you have to take sex offender training. It's done by the psychologist. And I went to them and they said, "You have to sign a piece of paper that says I am guilty." I said, "I'll never sign that because I'm not guilty." He said, "Well, then," I said, "Here's the deal. I'll tell you." I did the same thing. I put my file down there. I said, "I am guilty of everything in here. Everything in here it says that I did. I'm not proud of it. None of that's a crime. And I will admit to everything, but we're going to talk it through." When I finished, he and the class came out and said, "He's not guilty of a crime, and we're going to graduate him." The parole board met me, and they rejected me the first time. The second time they came in and they said, "Do you plead guilty?" I said, "No, I'll never plead guilty." But the warden ordered that I be released. And I have the letter from the parole board where they're saying he didn't plead guilty. We have never released anybody who doesn't plead guilty. He doesn't admit that he committed a crime. He doesn't do this. How can we parole him? Because the warden said he's innocent. The guards said I'm innocent. The prisoners said I'm innocent. I'm just telling you right now, I'm innocent. Am I proud of what I did? No. But I'm not going to let that define me. I know what happened. I know why it happened. And I've moved on, but no crime was committed.
I think that God has plans, for everyone, and I think that you going through the prison system, having to prove your innocence, being betrayed by the state apparatus that you once served, and all of that was part of this process for you to realize that you have to serve a greater role for a collective humanity. And look at you and the Palestinian people, for example. Like Gaza is a kind of jail where people are innocent and that they're stuck in there for crimes they haven't committed, and but they're not willing to confess that they're guilty to those crimes, and they're fighting back in any way that they can. So for you to go through this journey and then to be able to relate to Hamas in whatever way you can and the Palestinian people, maybe this was all, God maybe gave you these battles, Allah gave you these battles because you were a Marine, you were a tough guy, you were an honorable guy. And my point in asking you this question, it's good that you aired out the whole story. I think for a lot of people that this might be a new sort of learning curve about your journey through life. But my point was also to illustrate the actual nature of how brutal the spy versus spy game is, where it's down to families. In the third world, in the global south, we know all of this because it's part of our daily life. The veil between the state and the average public is not very thick. But in the West, I know that there is a sort of a kind of a stupor that everybody's in, where they have no idea about how people get compromised and how any of this worked. The Hunter Biden stories were funny to us in Pakistan. This was all we all knew this. We all know what the government does and how people around power operate and how lobbying groups operate and how these sorts of things go down. But I think
but what I can say about this too, just to add something to that, you say God had the plan and all that kind of stuff. Today, I'm not afraid of anything.
It's true.
You see, there was a time when you could. I have to be honest. I was afraid to go to jail. I didn't want to go to jail. No one wants to go to prison. I survived it. I not just survived it. I walked guilt and rehabilitated. I walked out a better man because I met the challenge, and I fought it on my terms. I walked out a complete man. And today, when people say, "Aren't you afraid?" What can they do to me that they haven't already done to me? See, I'm not intimidated by. I don't want to go back to prison, but I know what prison is right now. I know the reality of prison. I don't fear that consequence. I'm not going to let them intimidate me and say, "Well, if you do this, that, if you don't." I'm like, what more can you do? The only thing more they can do is kill me. That's it. And if be honest, if the government wants to kill you, they're going to kill you. There's nothing you can do to stop that. So I fear nothing. I'm fearless in what I do because they can't intimidate me anymore. They did their best. They called me the worst thing in the world you can call somebody. They put me in prison in hopes that would get me killed. I walked out of that prison on my terms. And today, I just tell people, you're free to believe whatever you want to believe. But if you think calling me that term scares me, intimidates me, you're so wrong. It just shows that you're irrelevant. It shows your ignorance. I'm not afraid of anything anymore, even death. Not that I'm foolish, but I accept that what's going to happen is going to happen. I don't want to die. I want to live a full life. I have children. I want to be a grandparent. I enjoy life. But I'm also not going to allow fear of what the government can do to try and shut me up, stop me from doing what is right. As my father said, do the right thing, but be prepared to accept the consequences for your actions. Every day I get up to try to do the right thing. to speak out in the cause of peace and justice, to try and prevent a war, to try and prevent a nuclear war, to develop better understandings between people. This is the right thing to do. And if I pay a price for that, I have to be willing to do that. If I'm not willing to accept the consequences for my actions, then I shouldn't go forth. But it's a coward who says, I'm doing this, but oh no, look what's happening to me. I know my government doesn't want me to do this. They took my passport so I can't travel. The FBI came to my house. They're trying to intimidate me.
This was for the audience more recently, by the way, like last month this happened. This is more recent.
Yeah, August 7th. The FBI came to my house, took all my electronics. And I told them, I said, you're not going to find anything on these electronics. Ask me any question you have. I'll answer it. I'm hiding nothing. Literally nothing. They spent many hours asking me questions, but they still took my electronics. So be it. I'm not afraid of anything that's on those electronics.
They're just harassment tactics, sir. You know that. They're just harassment tactics. They're just harassment tactics. You know what they're doing.
Yeah. But rather than whine about it, I mean, I talk about it to educate people about it, but rather than feeling sorry for myself, I just say that's the price you have to pay for doing what you believe in. And I will continue to do what I believe in, and there will be a price to pay. Hopefully, it won't be the ultimate price. Hopefully, it won't be anything that hurts my family.
Hopefully, we'll have you and your family.
They're not going to make it easy for me to continue to do my work.
No, I mean, I think there's nothing better that you can say in closing. As your father said, stand up for what's right, but be ready to face the consequences. And you've been practically demonstrating that in your life. Unfortunately, I wanted to get a more in-depth and strategic analysis of the conflict in Palestine. But inshallah, for another sort of sit down, whenever you have time. I've already taken up.
We'll do that the next time.
Yeah, I've already taken up too much of your time today, and you've been great with it. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to introduce you to a newer audience, and next time, inshallah, we'll be sitting down. Right. Next time we'll be sitting down with the audience, inshallah. We will be discussing the full-scale strategic situation in Gaza, as well as the long-term solution and the outcome that Mr. Scott Ritter sees that will be the more likely one. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time. And I can only ask you for one closing thing. I'm going to stop the recording. You please give your closing statements, and then I'm going to stop the recording because I want your email after this, because that's easier for us to communicate.
Yeah. Look, thank you very much for inviting me on. It's an honor and a privilege to talk with you and to be exposed to a new audience. As you say, inshallah, God willing, maybe I'll be able to visit that part of the world. My life's mission is to learn more about people, to meet people, to learn about their customs, their cultures, their traditions, their histories, to develop a great appreciation for people. And I've never been to Pakistan. I've never been to that part of the world. I've been to India, but I would love to do it at some point in time. But even if I can't, just having an opportunity to talk with you and learn about it indirectly would be wonderful. So I look forward to our next conversation.
Inshallah, sir. Thank you, sir, for your time. I'm just going to pause this now.